topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
Hey, and welcome back to Point of View for this second hour. My name is Nick Pitts, and this is the Millennial Roundtable, the Point of View show. We have got joining us at the roundtable today, we've got Kerby Anderson with us, as well as Jonathan Bodnar. And this is the second hour for the Dallas Network, and then for the vast majority of the country, Kerby, this is their first hour. So
first they're getting a chance to watch you online and see your bow tie and to learn about what day this is.
This is National Pie Day, Kerby. Jonathan, this is National Pie Day. We've talked about this during the first hour for the Dallas market, and it is just increasingly important for us to remember 3.14, again, March 14th, and it's National Pie Day, which forces us to ask the question, what is your favorite pie? And so during the first hour, Jonathan, we found out, one, Jonathan was gluten-free. Two, Jonathan does not have taste when it comes to... No, I'm just kidding. And so, Jonathan, tell our listeners, what is your favorite pie? What are we going to go with?
Peach cobbler.
Oh, man. And then some of our listeners are going to be calling in. The flood lines are going to come open on all the calls, and they're going to say, that's not pie, that's cobbler. There must be something different.
When you live in Texas, in the South.
That's true.
Let's say peach pie, but I know what yours is, so educate us, because you do not like these healthy pies.
Oh, my goodness. There's if I wanted to go on a diet, I'd eat apple pie, because that's pretty much like fruit, right? But you've got to go with chess pie. So being from Tennessee, it's just there's just a beautiful gloriousness when butter comes together with sugar and milk, and somehow you get it in a pie crust, and it forms this pie. It's just a reminder of God's goodness.
Wait, so what is
grace.
the pie filled with?
Deliciousness. Next question. And so, Kerby, for
Lots
our listeners,
of calories.
For our listeners, what's your favorite pie?
Yeah, we'll say peach, just because he said peach. So,
okay, some Georgia peaches right across the table from me.
Yeah, we certainly love that. And not to mention shoe fly pie. You got to say something about that. You're from Tennessee. You like that?
They're all just so good, Kerby.
Yeah,
they're so good. Almost as good as our rundown of what we've got for you today on this National Pie Day. We're going to be talking about everything from the special election that happened in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania earlier this morning, and then late into last night. We finally came to a winner with the Democrat Conor Lamb. Even though President Trump won that congressional district by 20 points, Conor Lamb was able to edge out a victory by less than 1 point, anywhere from 600 to 700 votes. We've been talking about that during the first hour. We'll get to that during the third hour here in a little bit. But then we'll also be talking about the relationship of evangelicals with President Trump. Yes. And there is quite a bit of controversy that's been stirring. A conversation has started because of an article that was in The Atlantic that was penned by Michael Gerson. Michael Gerson will be a familiar name to many of you. Gerson was the chief speechwriter for President Bush during Bush 43's time, as well as he is a writer for the Washington Post, and really wrote this 3,000-word long-form article in The Atlantic that's very stinging indictment of evangelical support of President Trump. And we'll be getting to that as well. But please know that you can call in. So you can call in and give voice to your comment and really answering the question, how is an evangelical to approach President Trump? Do you support the office? Do you respect the office? How do you voice dissent towards the president? Do you even voice a dissent towards the president? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And then for our Facebook watchers out there, or maybe you're a Facebook listener that's just listening in the background, you know that you can go on to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and you can leave a message or a comment actually in the live video box. And when you leave a message or comment, what started on Facebook will end up on air. So we look forward to hearing from you and reading some of your comments and questions over air, so we can have a conversation about how is the evangelicals to be able to approach this presidency that is just a very interesting and dynamic relationship. So we'll jump into it. So going over to pointofview.net, you'll see that article by Michael Gerson in the Atlantic, and really it's just, they call it the last temptation for evangelicals. And it really documents not only a history of evangelicalism within the U.S., but also the emergence of evangelicals onto the political sphere and just the increasing complexity of that within the presidency of Donald Trump. And so I will go ahead. I'm going to read a couple of excerpts because I think it's really important for us to capture. Again, Michael Gerson would qualify as a never Trumper, just to let individuals know. He is never Trumper, and you're going to hear that in some of his comments. So, quote, here's a pretty significant, what I would argue is pretty interesting point of view that he has. He says, quote, in a remarkably free country, many evangelicals view their rights as fragile, their institutions as threatened, and their dignity as assailed. The single largest religious demographic in the United States, representing about half the Republican coalition, sees itself as a besieged and disrespected minority. He goes on to say the difficulty with this approach to public life, other than its insanely pessimistic depiction of our flawed but wonderful country, is that it trivializes and undercuts the entire political enterprise. He goes on to say Trump consistently depicts evangelicals as they depict themselves, a mistreated minority in need of a defender who plays by worldly rules. Christianity is, quote, under siege, Trump told Liberty University audience. Quote, relish the opportunity to be an outsider, he added at a later date. Embrace the label. Protecting Christianity, Trump essentially argues, is a job for a bully. And what we continue to see, as we've seen throughout the election as well as into the first term of the presidency, is that many evangelical leaders are not only many evangelicals are supporting Trump, but they're also moving to great lengths. What some would consider is rationalizing some of his behavior that many would see as unseemly or inappropriate or not that of following after Christ. And it really has caused quite a conversation, Kerby.
Well, it certainly has, and I certainly know that you want to open up the conversation. One of the other articles that I would point people to is the one by David French, because I like what he says. He says that while Gerson ably explains that evangelicals feel as if they're under siege, he doesn't give an adequate explanation to why. And if you go back and look at, let's just take one of those that is used by Michael Gerson, and that is the decision on same-sex marriage, Obergefell. He says, well, why would they raise fears of coercion? Well, he goes back and even quotes the Supreme Court decision in which the Solicitor General acknowledged to Samuel Alito that, yeah, it really would be a problem if a Christian college did not allow same-sex marriage in their dorms. And, of course, he then goes on to give all sorts of examples. And I love this one, since we're coming to a break, that David French, who we knew before he was a columnist for National Review, used to be a lawyer that defended what was happening on campus. And he said, in my own law practice, I witnessed more than 100 colleges and universities attempt to bar one or more Christian student groups from campus, mainly on the grounds that it was discriminatory for Christian groups to reserve leadership positions for Christian students. I represented Christian students who were told they had to change their religious beliefs to earn degrees from public universities. And I've got a commentary coming out next week in which the Harvard group, the Christian group there, actually did not even require that you're a Christian, but did at least require that you did engage in immoral behavior. And when this lesbian leader got involved with other lesbians, they asked her to step down, and they're on probation. So this isn't unreasonable for evangelicals to say, religious liberty, this is sort of hanging in the balance. And this particular president we have right now puts people on the court that understand religious liberty. The other candidate probably would not have put people on the court that understands the importance of religious liberty. So that's another aspect of that conversation that I know we're going to have today with our listeners.
And so if I summarized it from a millennial standpoint, it's that Gerson paints evangelicals as Ned Flanders, powerless Ned Flanders from The Simpsons, and in need of a worldly big bully in I can't remember his name. Milhouse. And not Milhouse. I can't remember. We'll be back right after this where I can remember Simpsons references.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You may start seeing the phrase opinion laundering more often in news and commentaries. Journalists have used the phrase to identify something that has been taking place in the public relations industry. Politicians and journalists try to get legitimate third parties to validate their policy positions. That way they don't have to look like they're taking a position. Instead, they can use someone else to express their opinion. Kyle Smith documents the latest way that is being used in his article, Opinion Laundering in Parkland's Wake. Many journalists have been using the students affected by the Parkland shooting as a mouthpiece for the gun control message. Two of the students from the Parkland shooting have become instant celebrities on television and have huge Twitter followers. First, let me state the obvious. These students have the right to express their ideas and opinions. What they have experienced has affected them and given them a platform to speak out against gun violence. Second, they have entered into the public arena with their ideas and opinions. That means we can agree with them or disagree with them. We can point out flaws in their arguments. Such critique should be done carefully and graciously. Finally, a wise and discerning consumer of media should also recognize that media outlets like CNN and MSNBC are using these students to promote their own ideas about gun control, and they ignored other students who weren't promoting the gun control message. These media outlets were willing to promote a few of the students because they were seen as sympathetic victims, and those same media outlets warned that we should not criticize or correct anything the students say. It's a difficult balance. We should acknowledge the pain and grief these students feel, but we cannot let naive cliches and inaccurate conclusions go uncorrected. This is the challenge we face when students are exploited for opinion laundering. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts on the Millennial Roundtable on this National Pie Day on March 14th, 2018. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson as well as Jonathan Bodnar. And we have been talking about the Michael Gerson article that came out in The Atlantic, the evangelicals' relationship with President Trump. And Kerby, you were bringing up some pretty interesting points during the break about really identifying who are those evangelicals that he seems to be alluding to, right? And then who are some of the evangelicals that have been equally critical of the president and not wholesale support of him?
Yeah, let's give truth and fairness at the same time. Michael Gerson is very concerned about certain individuals, and I'm willing to name names, and of course then the phones will really light up. But I think when he's thinking about evangelicals that have compromised, he's thinking of Jonathan Falwell. Mm-hmm. No surprise there. This is a guy that endorsed Donald Trump when there were 17 Republican candidates. Mm-hmm. So was he ever going to back off of that? I don't think so. I assume he's thinking Franklin Graham and some people like that. But let's just at least be fair to say there are a lot of evangelical leaders. I will use Ed Stetzer as somebody who has probably talked as much about his concerns about the character of Donald Trump as Michael Gerson has. You know, I read his tweets every single day, and he's, of course, with the Graham Center. And so you have a mixed group. But let's recognize that some people right now that are attacking Donald Trump, some fit into one group, which would be those who would attack Mike Pence, who is a man of character even there, because they disagree with the policies. There's a second group, and I think Michael Gerson is in that group, and that is those individuals that have been part of the Trump They're never Trumpers because they were part of the Bush White House or they were part of the mainstream. They think that Mitt Romney's campaign was well run. They think that John McCain's campaign was well run. And they were horrified by the campaign of Donald Trump and the kinds of things that Donald Trump tweets every day. And so he fits into that category. But then there is a third group that I just alluded to, those individuals that are evangelicals that say, wait a minute, we have to be fair. We were horrified and upset and disappointed and angry and critical of Bill Clinton. We can't then turn around and say, well, now that we like the policies of Donald Trump and he's our tribe, we won't be critical of him. So let's recognize that you get different kinds of reactions. And so as much as I think Michael Gerson is going to stimulate our conversation, and the article's on the website, I really encourage people to read it all the way through and even read maybe the David French. Both of these are never Trumpers, but I think there are some points that are made that you can see back and forth between these individuals that have been on this program. And, of course, David French has been sitting in this very chair that I'm sitting in right now, talking about some of those issues, and almost ran against Donald Trump, if you remember that.
He almost did. Jonathan, from a millennial perspective, help us to understand evangelicals and their relationship to President Trump. What say you?
Wow, that's a loaded question. That was not pointed at all. I think there's so many different questions. There's questions of like, well, when people voted for Donald Trump, when 4/5 of the evangelical base voted for Donald Trump, were they voting for Donald Trump or were they voting against Hillary Clinton? And it's a very simple question, but does a vote mean they endorse everything that he's saying? And obviously a lot of these leaders, we can point to evangelical leaders and we can kind of separate that to like Kerby did a moment ago, and just separate it between people that are endorsing everything and people that are just, supporting because he's the president and because we believe, as evangelicals, that God's put him up there, and he's God's pawn, if you will, and so I think it's a very important distinction.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm very interested in is, again, Kerby, you've delineated between certain individuals and their affiliations with President Trump. You've got the Jerry Falwell Jr.'s, the president of Liberty, that seems to just be a very much an adamant supporter regardless of what's happening. I'd probably include First Baptist Dallas's pastor, Robert Jeffers, in that group as well. I think that was illuminated even last week because President Trump, there's allegations of a particular porn star named Stormy Daniels. Right. And Robert Jeffers has gone on air on Fox News specifically and called that absolutely ludicrous to call Trump evangelical supporters hypocrites. He goes, quote, "Evangelicals know they're not compromising their beliefs in order to support this great president." He goes on to say, quote, "Evangelicals still believe in the commandment, thou shalt not have sex with a porn star. However, whether this president violated that commandment," and here's the really key point, "is totally irrelevant to our support of him." Now, this goes back to, again, the Never Trumpers group, that character matters. Going back to Proverbs 14, the idea that character is some righteousness exalts a nation, sin disgraces a nation. And so the idea of being, and maybe he's just rhetorical flourish right here, the idea of it being totally relevant. Character is not everything, but it has to be something, we would assume, especially from a Southern Baptist preacher going in line with the 1994 resolution at the Southern Baptist Convention at the annual meetings that talked about the significance of character in the election. So there are some that are very, but what does it, that vary relative to their support, but what does it mean in today's society to be able to voice support? What I'm increasingly finding is that if you are at one time critical of the president, you are no longer supportive of that president. And when has it become the case that a voice of criticism indicates that you are not completely supportive of him?
I don't know. The scriptures do talk about the wounds of a friend. Is that fair?
Yeah, the wounds of a friend.
And again, to be fair, okay, he's Southern Baptist. You just mentioned Southern Baptist pastor. I can mention the head of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission for the Southern Baptists, who is Russell Moore. And you will see him raising very important ethical questions there as well. But since it's the Millennial Roundtable, and I got two millennials here, talk about this for just a minute, because there is a sense for your generation that already sort of looks at politics a little bit with a jaundiced eye, a little bit skeptical, saying, now, wait a minute, you guys say that sex is important. You've had a real problem with same-sex marriage. You've talked about homosexuality. You talk about premarital sex and those kinds of things. And then when we have evidence, now, again, to be fair, David French points out only about 8% of Trump voters believe that the sexual assault claims are credible, and who knows how many believe about this Stormy, whatever her name is, are credible. But assuming that they are, and then they turn a blind eye, how does that affect those of you that are evangelicals around the table?
Yeah, I'm very fascinated in that. But before I answer, I'm going to go ahead and say we've opened the phone lines, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. From an evangelical standpoint, what does it look like to support President Trump? Is it wrong to be critical of him? We'd love to hear from you. And that's a really interesting thing.
You're evangelical millennial. Tell me what you're thinking.
That's a very interesting thing, Kerby, because, again, I'm going to continue to point back to this idea that growing up, evangelical millennials that were paying attention to any degree whatsoever, especially in the 1990s, were continually reminded, and we saw the outrage of Tony Perkins. We saw the outrage of every evangelical when it came to what Bill Clinton did in the Oval Office. They threw their hands up in the air and wondered that he's disgraced the office.
Right.
And now, now I'm going to go. We have a president that literally called a news anchor an SOB, and not just in back channel, in a rally, called him a sleepy-eyed SOB, like that. And again, here's what some of you, I'll even repudiate my thing. No president has been perfect. No president. You go back and you read Kennedy, read LBJ. You read. What
they said it in private. They just didn't say it at a rally.
They did not say it at a rally. They said it in. They said it in private, but they did not say it in public. And if I said that type of word, that one of my favorite little exercises now that I like to do, at least attempt to do, is I'm going to walk into a room and call somebody a sleepy-eyed SOB. And if they voice criticism at me for that, then I'm like, well, then why are you quiet towards our president when he does it, right? Like, it just makes no sense to me. And especially when this hypocrisy, because hypocrisy's always been that thing that's been the key word for millennials, because we grew up in an age in which everything was public. Everything has always been public because social media has made everything prevalent about our personal lives. And so when we see those misalignments that are happening between someone's character and between someone's beliefs, it just continues to intensify that hypocrisy fire that's so hard for us to be able to understand why. Right, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think, if you look back to his election process and, while he was going through his campaign and everything, it's like they're slowly compromising. It's not an overnight thing. It's not that people just fell asleep, oh, nope, we don't care anymore. It was a slow fade. And, personally, I don't doubt the Stormy Daniels thing one bit, just to be honest. It's like it's Donald Trump. Like, he's
a Playboy video, for God's sake.
He's a, real estate mogul. But at the same time, it's like, what is the balance between our concern on policy and our concern on character?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a huge question that needs to be addressed. And what is evangelicals' job, in that balance?
Yeah. If you're going to be the moral caretaker of values, you should be speaking out on those issues. And if you did in the 1990s, it's still appropriate in the 21st century.
And vote, right? Too, because, evangelicals, like I know a lot of people, even from my church, we just don't get into politics. We just don't. And I'm like, you want to talk about moral, what are you doing about it?
Yeah, you've been given a certain gifts and you've been given certain propensities, especially here in the U.S. How are you stewarding those gifts? We want to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212, or you can jump over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We're going to take a break, but we're going to come back and continue to talk about the tenuous relationship of evangelicals and President Trump. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll be back right after this.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 16th. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again,
is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm on this March 14, 2018 day. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson as well as Jonathan Bodnar. And we have been talking about Michael Gerson's article, which he is illuminating the relationship of evangelicals to President Trump. Kind of goes through the history of evangelicals, largely talking about their kind of isolationist tendencies, one, and then that victim mentality, two, that's begun to be pervasive and outwardly manifesting itself, especially here in recent history, to now the willingness to be the good little Christian that needs a worldly bully, in his terms, to be able to defend them in the public square. I likened it to The Simpsons earlier in the show, and I forgot Nelson. So we find
Nelson
ourselves as Ned Flanders, that's kind of small, timid, and very passive, in need of a Nelson the bully to be able to fight for us in the public square. And we've been talking about, specifically, Jonathan and I have been back and forth, Kerby really brought it on, about this idea of what is evangelicals, the millennial evangelicals, to make of this, especially since a key word has been hypocrisy in our generation, has really been accentuated. And when you think about some of the words that our president has been saying, the names he's calling individuals, as well as some of the past actions, it just seems very incongruent with the biblical narrative. And what are we to make of this? One, for individuals that aren't never Trumpers, because we know that they'll be critical, but two, some of those individuals that have been silent, one, on our president, or two, been actively supporting and justifying some of this behavior. And so we would love to hear from you. What is your understanding of a relationship of evangelicals to President Trump, one? And two, what I'd be really interested in is what does it look like to support our president, but also how do you deal with just some of the words that he's saying? And so we're going to continue to take some phone calls. And so we're going to go to Alberto in Oklahoma. Alberto, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Alberto.
I'm here.
Hey, great to hear from you. What is your point of view?
Well, I've been listening to you guys, and I guess that controversy about Donald Trump just not really been up and up on the moral side of it. And, I think they were just making too much of it. He was elected to fix broken things with the USA and help the people, and I think he's a wonderful man. He's helping the people. He's a good businessman, and we're just making too much of it. It's imperfect, but I think that he is the best that we can get, and I don't know. I don't think that it probably sounds like we should give him a break, but I don't know. It's kind of a hard decision to make, but I think just doing the right things for the country, and he loves the country, and he loves the people, and you see the reaction from people that, they, of course, the moral people that judge people on little things and sometimes big things, but I just wanted to bring that up, and I think that he is doing good things for America, and I don't know where you guys stand on that, but
yeah,
that's how I feel about it.
Alberto, you bring up a really great point that I think many in America that are Trump supporters would say, that they point to a lot of the good things that he's done. I know that some of my relatives have been able to accentuate that point. They point to the fact that what he's done relative to the demise of ISIS and how he's continued to go after them, what he's done relative to deregulation is pretty significant. This tax plan and so what his leadership with the economy has done. There's been a lot of good things that have been done under under the Trump administration. But what I'm interested in, especially Alberto, in your comment, is do we only have to be cheerleaders, or can we not call out and voice criticism to our president? For example, just even as recently as this past weekend, when he calls Chuck Todd, who is the Meet the Press moderator, a sleepy-eyed SOB. If I said that, I don't know if I would be able to finish the sentence without feeling the hand upon my face from my father. Like, there's no way, in a loving way, there's no way that they would condone that type of language. And I just don't understand how we've become so numb to it. I don't know if we've become numb. I hate the idea of normalizing. I think it's been so prevalently used. I just am so confused by evangelicals either turning the other side to it Or I'm just very interested. And so I'll go to Facebook really quickly. We've got Joyce on Facebook that says, I think our country would be in a much worse state with her at the office. The valid question she was talking about, it's a confusing time. And she kind of wishes that his words, she says, would be more tame, but be just as strong. And I think that is something that, Kerby, that voters are gravitating towards, is this idea that he's a strong leader. In a very relativistic age, the strong person wins. And when we're questioning what's up and what's down, what's male and what's female, President Trump has been that strong man that's really come in and really set us on a direction, right?
Well, it certainly has. And maybe for Alberto and some of the other calls we're going to get, I always break it down into thirds, and you can agree or disagree. But first of all, you want to elect an individual that you agree with in terms of their policy. And so certainly we can go through the various appointments to the Supreme Court, one in particular, but others that will come down the line. And again, those appointed to the federal court, you've mentioned the regulatory change, the tax change, all those kinds of benefits, foreign policy and the rest. So he certainly gets a very high marks for that. Number two, I always, when I'm looking at an executive, whether it's a governor or in this case the president, have they put good people in office? And not only has he put good people in office, a few people that I had questions about that he put in office, including one yesterday, he's given them a pink slip and put a better person in office, because I would have to say that Mike Pompeo is a much more adequate and a better individual as Secretary of State than even Rex Tillerson. So I think he gets high marks for that. And that's what Alberto was saying. But when you get over to the character part, that's the third point. You would like to get 3 out of 3. If you get 1 out of 3, sometimes you're lucky. 2 out of 3, pretty good. But that doesn't mean I ignore the character issue. Mm-hmm. And if any other president, male or female, had done and said some of the things this president would say, people, at least of the opposite party, would be very critical of that. And so I think you can separate the two. You can say, I appreciate your policies. I appreciate the people you've put in office. I appreciate the direction in which the country is going, but I don't like your behavior. I don't like some of your tweets. I don't like some of the things you say. I don't like some of your past behavior. And we can still say we uphold and honor the office of the presidency, even if we disagree with some of the things a particular occupant of the presidency is doing. Is that fair?
Yeah. And so, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I think, Kerby, that's a perfect way of stating it, because at the end of the day, I think we vote for policy. Like, we're not electing a pastor. We're not electing, a pope or anything like that. And so at the end of the day, I think that perhaps the policy and the team that you put around has a little more weight than, the character does in that sense. And so, like Alberto said, it's really important. Like, we hired this guy to do a job, and so, but then again, you also have the weight of that job and the importance and the platform and the, what does America look like?
So I'm going to press you on this, Jonathan. Okay, so
go ahead.
Because you're an entrepreneur, you're hiring individuals. Do you hire an individual? Don't you look into a person's character as well, their character attributes and traits when you hire someone?
I do. Okay. But the number one thing that has the most weight is how well they get the job done.
Okay.
I don't hire just because they're Christian, and I don't hire just because, they're religiously aligned or anything. And I think we knew that when Donald Trump was gunning in office. We knew the man wasn't, picture perfect. He wasn't the Pope.
He was picture perfect on the Playboy. I believe that was a pretty good picture of him on the cover of Playboy. But keep on going.
No, but that's a good question, because it's like when you hire people, you do look at, character elements and everything, but that doesn't always decide, whether they get the job done or not.
I agree. Let's keep on going to some phone calls. We've got Joseph in Georgia right now. Joseph, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Joseph, what is your point of view?
Well, please, if the millennials want an example in character, the only person who has been given to us as Christians is the Lord Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
They should not look at President Trump, for example.
Yeah.
He's a human being like us. And we are just looking for an excuse for evangelicals to join the never Trumpists who do not see anything good about this president. It is wrong for an evangelical to join that. By criticizing him in public, you are giving ammunition to those who want to pull him down. That is my first point. The second point is that if it is okay for people to hate President Trump, it should be okay for people to love him to the extent that they will never see anything wrong with him. The opposite of hate is love. And my Bible tells me in 1 Corinthians 13 that love does not take account of evil. So my president may be wrong, but because I love him, I don't see anything wrong with it. And there is nothing wrong about it. It's fair. So don't let us have a discussion to make it look like it is okay to hate the president, but it is bad to love him. I disagree with that point.
John.
That is why I support pastors like Pastor Jeffries who don't see anything wrong with the president. They should love him, and they should not give any ammunition to the enemy.
Yeah, Joseph, we've got to go to a commercial break, but we're going to come back after this because you bring up some great points.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. A recent survey of Big Ten colleges reveals that universities are increasingly providing space for religious students on campus. According to the report, these new spaces on campus serve students from a variety of faith backgrounds. Some use the rooms for prayer and others for religious gatherings. But not everyone thinks the rooms should be used for just religious purposes, however. The Ohio State University student government passed a resolution urging campus leaders to reconsider the interfaith space as religious use only. Activists off campus questioned the University of Iowa, suggesting that setting aside rooms for use by religious students unconstitutionally entangled itself with religion. That, of course, is simply the political posturing of ideologues that dislike any religion appearing in public. The efforts by these universities are to be commended. Providing space for religious students to meet is an important means of recognizing the diverse religious background of its student body. At the same time, it should be unnecessary. Religious students should be able to use campus space on the same terms as secular students. To the extent certain religious backgrounds require specific space, the efforts by these Big Ten universities are to be commended. Yet it is important to remind our co-eds that, as in all of life, religious liberty means religious students are to be welcomed and tolerated in the university setting. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Kerby Anderson as well as Jonathan Bodnar, and we have been talking about, on this National Pi Day, evangelical relationship to President Trump. Really starting the jump point would be Michael Gerson's article in The Atlantic, kind of accentuating the history of evangelicals, but then also now to modern day evangelicals' relationship to this president, who at particular times has been a champion for us. There's no doubt that he's done significant work relative to religious liberty, as well as his justice appointments, as well as a number of other issues relative to deregulation, ISIS, and religious liberty on the international front. But also there has been some character traits and some qualities of what he's done that individuals have questions for. And so we have been taking some of your phone calls, and we'll continue taking those phone calls. There's one line that we've got open right now. Everybody else is on hold right now. So that number is 800-351-1212. And then we've also been taking some comments on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And Kerby, you had somebody that you were interested in.
I have somebody that actually went into the inbox, and Roberta Smith said this: I like several things he has or is doing, but got thoroughly disgusted with his language, behavior, crudeness, disrespect for many people, that he has to make everything about himself, how unacceptable his ways are for discharging people, and his narcissism. By the way, yesterday when we had Joel Rosenberg in here, we'd heard that he discharged Rex Tillerson by tweet, and now there's evidence probably not the case. But, you know, again, some people are still repeating that and said that he had some contact. But anyway, Roberta Smith goes on to say that I love the new Supreme Court justice and some of the policies put into place. And this is where I think you can make a distinction. Again, as I talked about your policies, the people you put in office, because especially a president can't do it all. So the people around him, and we talk about, again, some people that we have such high respect, starting with Mike Pence all the way to Ben Carson, to Betsy DeVos, and go down the way, Rick, as well as a number of other people. I go through the whole long list. Yeah. It's going to take forever. And so, but the point I think she was making is one we've made before. I can agree with his policies. I can agree with his people. I can agree with his appointments to the Supreme Court. But I can still be at least critical of his character in office, because the character in office under Bill Clinton was not the best, and I believe that George W. Bush changed that and turned that around. I'm hoping that the next president will. I'm frankly hoping that the vice president, Mike Pence, who is really a very outstanding individual of character, might bring some of that back. But as we talked with Jonathan just a minute ago, we knew what we were getting when we elected this individual. Reality shows, Playboy magazine, multiple marriages, and that doesn't mean we have to endorse that either.
Yeah, so I think Joseph brought up a good point that I'd probably disagree with to a certain degree. And so Joseph kind of accentuated the fact that we have Jesus as our model. I mean, there's biblical justification for that, right? So we think about Hebrews 12 and the idea of running the race that's set before us, setting our eyes on the author and perfecter. We think about what Paul said in Colossians 3:2, set our eyes on things above and not on things of earth. But I think it's important for us to remember, because Joseph referenced the idea from 1 Corinthians, the idea of setting our eyes on Jesus, but also in 1 Corinthians 11, it talked about imitate me as I imitate Christ Jesus.
Follow me as I follow Christ.
And that even Paul said that there are certain individuals, he was insinuating there's certain individuals that we can look to and that we can model our behavior after, because they're being Jesus to us and helping us figure out what it looks like for the righteous to live by faith today. And traditionally, the president has been that individual.
Well, and again, I might just mention this. I've said this before, but in the 1930s, you could go into lots of homes in America and you would see a portrait or a picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, that was there, number one, to say, well, kids, you're supposed to support the president, but it was also, kids, you should be like the president. Well, I don't think we had any pictures of Bill Clinton in homes in the 1990s. I don't think a lot of people have pictures today of Donald Trump. Maybe there were some homes that had pictures of Barack Obama because he may have been a role model for some in the African-American community. But the bottom line is, we have gone far astray, where at one time we said, we want you to emulate the behavior of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, maybe even a Ronald Reagan in more modern times. But we haven't exactly had that, and we certainly don't have that right now in the Oval Office.
Yeah, so to continue to go to Facebook, you can go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Some people are commenting. Ruth said that when she says she supports the president's policies, again, making that delineation between the policies and the character. But she turned off the rally after his comment about Chuck Todd and sent that comment because she, quote, hated the language, which I think many people did. Like, they support his policies, but this name calling and this language that he's using is just, I wouldn't, my grandma often would say, what you had in your mouth, I wouldn't put in my hand. Mm-hmm. And so some of this comments that he's making is just very unfortunate. But again, Maria, another Facebook comment said, we definitely need to continue to pray for our president, whether or not we agree with him. And I completely agree, heeding the biblical command to pray for those that are in leadership. And so we're going to continue taking some phone calls right now. Let's go ahead and jump on over to Sandra in California right now. Sandra, are you there?
Hi, yes. I realize that he grew up around Jersey and New York, and those people are just really blunt and rough, right up in your face. I mean, that's the way they talk. And you compare his to Paul Rand has said some things, and it's so different, especially with that Baptist influence. You know, you can hear the Christian influence, and you hear, you can't tell people from different parts of the country now, usually, because most everybody has a Western type of dialect. But they don't talk about what Kennedy did when he wasn't around his wife. Come out to Palm Springs and have there was a bunch of girls around the pool with the negligees and stuff like that. Because and Bill Clinton, of course. But I'm going to tell you, one with a filthy mouth was that Hillary Clinton. There were some men that wrote books over 20 years ago. They just couldn't stand her mouth. And I mean, she could use the F word every other word or cuss.
Yeah,
it was filthy. And thank God she didn't get in there. But he needs to tone it down, and more prayer to him, because FDR was the one that had over 500 communists around him. And the influence in our media was really revving up by that time.
It's always so fascinating, Sandra, because you bring up a great point in the sense that there's certain proclivities and inclinations and personalities that are accentuated in the regions of the country. So I think about, I'm from the South, and even though Texas is technically geographically the South, it's not the South. Texas is its own being. So you can group it in the Southwest if you want, but it's not the South. And so in the South, there's a gentility and an honor that's there, kind of not necessarily, to a certain degree, there's an honor-based culture in the sense that we're going to be very much nice to your face. Even if we don't like you, the idea of being out in public, you would never disrespect or they have to
say, bless your heart.
Bless your heart. I need to hug your neck. Yeah. I need something along those lines. Yeah. There's a certain deference that's given, especially towards those that are older. In the South, that not to say that Texas is abrasive or not to say that Texas is disrespectful, but just to say it's accentuated in the South. And you bring up a great point that in the North, in New York, Trump was born there, he was raised there, and there's just a certain upfrontness, I'll say, there in New York that, again, many across the country are listening to. But again, he's not our first president from New York, but yet this is just a difference. And I think it's an important difference for us to be able to make, that all presidents and many people, we all are sinners, right? Like we all have fallen short of the glory of God. We recognize the power of the mouth from James 3. But what's different about this president in particular, and even different, Sandra, about the comments that you were making with Hillary Clinton, is that this president and this public figure airs those things in public. Like he does not have those private comments that are saved for private, that these are all out in public. And as the leader of the free world, what you say bears much greater weight than in other individuals. And that's what's become very interesting. And so we're going to take one of those breaks, but you can call in 800-351-1212 or jump on over to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we'll be back right after this.
From Affirm Films, the studio that brought you Risen and War Room, comes Paul, Apostle of Christ. Two men challenged an empire in order to live out the gospel of Jesus Christ and spread their message to the world.
Where sin abounds, grace abounds more.
Starring Jim Caviezel. Paul, Apostle of Christ. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters March 23rd. More information is available at paulmovie.com.
Few of us get the chance to really make a difference, but today you have an opportunity. The question is whether you will seize it. Becoming a Truth Team partner with Point of View magnifies your impact in this generation and perhaps for many to come. When you stop what you're doing and call us or give online, you invest in hard work that has changed lives and communities for 45 years. Grab this opportunity. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Don't let this opportunity pass by. Join the team and make a difference. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this March 14, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts on this National Pie Day. This is the Millennial Roundtable here on Point of View. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson as well as Jonathan Bodnar. And during the first hour, that was only the local Dallas market, we were talking about what happened in Pennsylvania, specifically in the Pittsburgh area, Pennsylvania 18 district last night, about how the Democrat Connor Lamb ended up overcoming and winning, even though President Trump won that district by 20 points during the 2016 election. We jumped over during the second hour and talked about the relationship of evangelicals to President Trump, and this piece that's been highlighted continually that was written by Michael Gerson, the former Bush 43 speechwriter. It shows the kind of the history of evangelicalism to where it is today, which many are likening it to kind of a victimhood mentality, feeling threatened and in need of a bully that's going to stand up for them and protect them, is kind of how Gerson characterizes this. How I characterize it from a millennial standpoint is kind of The Simpsons. We've got a Ned Flanders, a very passive individual in need of a Nelson bully. That's able to stand up for them. And so we've been talking about that and taking some of your questions as well. And so I'm going to jump over on Facebook because there's been a lot of activity over there. And you can join the Facebook audience as well by going to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And if you're over there right now, you're looking right at me. So I apologize that you've got to see me, but you are able to get your comments and questions in because we have no room on the phone lines right now because everyone's been calling in. But there's been some great points that have been highlighted. Rick agrees with Sarah Hall, and Sarah Hall says, quote, "I think we're forgetting is God is the one to appoint our rulers, whether good or bad, and we're to support our leaders. In the Bible, God appointed David, and David committed both adultery and murder, yet God kept him in power. What we as Christians should do before we put a leader in power is to pray to know who is God's choice. God can use a bad leader in ways he can never use a good leader, and vice versa." And I think that's exactly correct, to a large degree, Sarah. I think what we continue to see, like even in Proverbs 21:1, that God even controls the king's heart. It's like a channel of water in our King of Kings' hands. He moves it to and fro whichever way that he so pleases. But I also think understanding that God's going to do what he can do, why not be able to use our moral agency that we have in order to make the best selection? I think that's one of the things that I want to continue to accentuate. And what does it look like is the point that I continue to come back to. What does it look like? Is it even possible to voice dissent or to be critical of our president during this time as well?
You brought up the other point that I thought needed to be brought up, and that is, again, we have the Millennial Roundtable, and one of the lessons millennials have learned in school is you can never be critical. You can never make a judgment. Even as I've looked at some of the articles and some of the Facebook comments and some of the others, we keep having people say, well, we should never say something derogatory about the president, or we should never judge the president. Wait a minute. The scriptures are very clear that we shouldn't be derogatory, but we should make moral judgments, right? And the problem is we have a whole generation that has memorized Matthew 7:1. Judge not that you might be judged. And they don't even look at the context where Jesus is really talking about don't be judging the speck in another person's eye when you have a log in your own. It's back to about hypocrisy, isn't it?
Oh.
And what about this? I got two millennials sitting here. You've learned, at least your peers have learned, that you're never supposed to make a moral judgment. So I think some of the reaction to this is because people said, well, I'm not supposed to judge the president. What about that, Jonathan? Any thoughts?
Well, I think it's funny because half our generation subscribes, or perhaps more than half of the generation subscribes to the fact that, it's like, oh, I'll never upset you or offend you unless you disagree with me. And so it's, when we actually come out and when it's mind-boggling to a lot of people that we can disagree with ourselves or our own choice. We can say, hey, look, like we can differentiate, the person from, the policies and the character and everything. And I think that's important because, had Hillary got elected, I don't think a lot of people would have separated the person from the character and all of that. And I think as Christians, that's important because we really can. We can look at him and say, okay, we've learned throughout everyone's comments that we can look at him and, really separate that. So.
Yeah, I think one of the funny things is there's individuals that are very hesitant. I send out a daily email called the Daily Briefing that kind of tries to make sense of the news from a biblical perspective. And one of the things, whenever I'm a little critical of our president during those times, I largely try to stay out of the fray as much as I can. But when there are moments when it just seems obviously deviating from the biblical narrative, they're very critical and they give voice to that criticism through their replies and say, how can you be so critical of our president? And I want to swing around and say, how can you be so critical of me? Right? Because at the end of the day, I believe it to be true from Proverbs 27:17, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Like, I understand that I'm not a perfect person. I want to get better. And a part of the ways that you get better is accentuating and understanding what's wrong in order that you can move towards what's right. Nobody's perfect, but if you're following after Jesus, you should be getting better. You should be getting perfect. That's why Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3, we're being transformed from one degree of glory to the next. And for an individual that's not being transformed, it appears as though if there's no change, I question whether you're alive. Right.
And again, you're from Tennessee. Didn't the mayor in Nashville lose a job because of a moral issue?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
And we recognize that. And so I don't want to put any office holder, president, governor, mayor, a city council person above at least some moral reflection. And sometimes if that moral issue becomes too big of an issue, you can't continue to do your job. Is that fair?
Completely agree. And so grace allows you, grace experiences forgiveness, but forgiveness doesn't mean you're kind of exempt from the consequences of some of your decisions, which I think is an important point. Let's jump on over to the phone calls. We've got Jerry from Georgia. Jerry, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Jerry, what's your point of view?
Yeah, see, I don't agree with what President Trump is saying and doing. I don't understand why he does it. I wish he would apologize. I wish somebody would talk to him, like Pence or it would be nice if he had another meeting with when he met with a bunch of preachers, when he was running for office, and they talked to him, and I think had a lot to do with him becoming a stronger, obviously, Christian than he ever was.
And I have heard that sometimes that has happened. So, let's give some of the pastors some credit, because I think some of them have in private, said some things. And I'm sure, I know Mike Pence, known him for decades. He's probably said some things to the president too. But back to the point, what's your thought about some of the actions by the president and some of his words?
Yeah, I don't like it at all. I wish he would apologize and tone it down. That's the only thing I don't like. I mean, just like you guys said earlier, we didn't elect a preacher. We elected someone to turn this country around, and people kind of forget that because look at his past, and you can expect some of this stuff to still come out. I mean, even though I believe he's changed. Since he's become president, since preachers have talked to him, I believe he is more of a Christian than he was, but he's still imperfect and he's still going to make mistakes, and we need to pray for him and just ask
Yeah, I can. I completely agree with you, Jerry. We're going to have to take one of those commercial breaks, but we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You may start seeing the phrase opinion laundering more often in news and commentaries. Journalists have used the phrase to identify something that has been taking place in the public relations industry. Politicians and journalists try to get legitimate third parties to validate their policy positions. That way they don't have to look like they're taking a position. Instead, they can use someone else to express their opinion. Kyle Smith documents the latest way that is being used in his article, Opinion Laundering in Parkland's Wake. Many journalists have been using the students affected by the Parkland shooting as a mouthpiece for the gun control message. Two of the students from the Parkland shooting have become instant celebrities on television and have huge Twitter followers. First, let me state the obvious. These students have the right to express their ideas and opinions. What they have experienced has affected them and given them a platform to speak out against gun violence. Second, they have entered into the public arena with their ideas and opinions. That means we can agree with them or disagree with them. We can point out flaws in their arguments. Such critique should be done carefully and graciously. Finally, a wise and discerning consumer of media should also recognize that media outlets like CNN and MSNBC are using these students to promote their own ideas about gun control, and they ignored other students who weren't promoting the gun control message. These media outlets were willing to promote a few of the students because they were seen as sympathetic victims, and those same media outlets warned that we should not criticize or correct anything the students say. It's a difficult balance. We should acknowledge the pain and grief these students feel, but we cannot let naive cliches and inaccurate conclusions go uncorrected. This is the challenge we face when students are exploited for opinion laundering. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG, in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable today by Kerby Anderson as well as Jonathan Bodnar. And we have been talking about the evangelical relationship to President Trump, really a touch point on a phenomenal article by Michael Gerson, writing in The Atlantic, talking about the history of evangelicals in the public square, and then now moving into a space where it seems as though there are many individuals within the evangelical camp that have kind of excused some of the language, actions, and allegations of President Trump and their support for him. And we have been on the phones, and we've been taking your phone calls, 800-351-1212, and then also taking some of your comments and sharing some of your comments online on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And I'm going to jump over to one of those comments now. We've got John that wrote, and he says, we're in a post-Christian culture, so we as Christians have to pick the best candidate to protect the constitutional liberties for all citizens. Completely agree. Nowhere in the Bible does it say to check out in the area of citizenship. I shudder to think Christians would only vote for the outwardly moral person. Criticize Trump for the things done while in office, while in the same breath praise for the good policies that are important to Christians and protect constitutional liberties. John, I completely agree with you. But one of the things that I want to continue to accentuate is I'm personally, I'll just be very blunt here. I'm just tired of going back to 2016. Like, I'm tired of us reliving that election. I'm tired of attention that's given on the other candidate. That's the ghost of Hillary that continues to haunt many Republicans. Like, we've moved past that. He's been in office now. And like you said, let's judge him for what he's done in office. And I'm an individual that I want to praise him for some of the great things that he's done. I love what he's done relative his administration's done to deregulation. I love what's happened with ISIS. I love the tax reform bill. I love a lot of things that have happened. I am completely against some of the language that he's used. It's just atrocious language. I'm very interested to see what's going to play out relative to this Stormy Daniels. I don't think there's often that we have to put a porn star and a president in the same sentence, but this is where we find ourselves in 2018. What a time to be alive, y'all. What a time to be alive. But I think it's increasingly important for evangelicals to be the conscience of the state, as Martin Luther King said, to really, if no one else is going to speak on, who else is going to speak on morality if Christians don't, Kerby?
Well, that's the problem. And again, I don't want everybody to think that what we're saying today is that means you all need to run to your Twitter account if you have it, or a Facebook account, and criticize the president. What we're talking about is that when the conversation comes up, we should point people back to the person, Jesus Christ, point people back to our guidelines that's found in the Bible. And again, we should not try to compromise. And I think what is going to be so hurtful for the gospel, again, I have two millennials here. Tell me if this isn't true, that what hurts the gospel right now is hypocrisy. There are all sorts of studies done, but let me just quote one called Unchristian. That was done by Dave Kinnaman of the Bodnar Research Group. Of course, you can go to DC Talk if you want to use music, I know. But, he pointed out that when they interviewed your generation, people that are your peers, why are you not a Christian? The number one reason was hypocrisy. Number two reason, overly political. Number three reason, these are not necessarily in order after that, anti-gay. And so you can begin to see that certainly there is this issue of hypocrisy. Is that new? No, because we just quoted from Matthew 7. That's what Jesus was talking about with the Pharisees back in the first century. So if Christians are seen as hypocritical, if very prominent evangelical pastors and other leaders say, well, maybe all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We're all sinners, hey, we knew what we got when we voted for it. Well, all of that's true. But at one point, I think to at least be able to have those individuals or you in a conversation say, yes, I'm disappointed by that kind of behavior, is helpful, because otherwise we're sending the signal to the next generation that really it doesn't matter. Your sexual proclivities don't matter at all, and anything you do, it doesn't matter, because as we were told in the 1990s by secular people, the character of, in this case, Bill Clinton doesn't matter. And character does matter. We just pointed that out, didn't we?
And character does matter, Jonathan. And again, look, we're not arguing for individuals that character is the primary thing that we're looking for, but we are saying that to a certain extent, when we're choosing a candidate and when we're supporting a president, that character does have some weight. And to either, one, openly justify it and try to slide around it, or two, to refuse to address it, I think does a great detriment to the evangelicals.
Yeah, I think, when I went through Bible college, one of the things we always said was God qualifies the called and doesn't call the qualified. And I think that's a massive distinction in this entire, debate. And so I think that, character obviously is a huge piece of that, but at the same time, God calls the qualified,
I think that's one of the fascinating things, and we're going to jump on the phone lines here in a second. I think that's one of the fascinating things, because in this Twitter age, social media age, we just expect everyone to give a response every time. And I just don't think that's healthy, one, and I don't think that's appropriate. I think to a large part, individuals that are refusing to comment on bigger stories, even though they commented on every other story, I think a response is kind of needed. But at the end of the day, what I'm more concerned about is when individuals have that platform and when they openly either move around it or try to justify it when it's unjustifiable. Calling someone an SOB is unjustifiable. Especially when you are the president of the United States and you are in the bully pulpit. I just think that's unjustifiable. Call me old-fashioned, call me a prude, call me a Bible thumper. Calling somebody an SOB just doesn't seem like a good tact.
Did you think you'd be saying that word so much today?
I didn't think I'd say porn star, SOB. It's been a crazy day.
And again, if we understand that these are character images. I understand that Joseph was reminding us that the model for character is obviously Jesus Christ. But if people don't understand that Billy Graham showed us what character looks like, and if a lot of us around the table, as much as we like some of the policies of the administration, would have much less concern if Mike Pence became the president, because he's a man of character, then you can see how that's an image that we want our young people to learn about, right?
Completely agree. And so let's go ahead and take some phone calls. So we've got Bob there. Bob, are you there?
Hi, how you doing, folks?
Hey, Bob. How are you? What's your point of view?
Great. Two or three real quick things. One is, these kids on the way to school listen to more stuff than Trump puts out. He's pretty tame compared to them on the FM radio stations around here. And the other thing is you elected a tough guy, and that's what you got. And I think that, the Bible talks about how to go. We piped and you did not dance, and you wailed and you did not mourn. We got what we got, and we need a tough guy to take on some of these other tough candidates, these tough characters. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, Bob, thank you so much. And again, I think he brings up a great comparison point. There is, to a certain extent, when you look at the culture, you look at Post Malone, for example, and Miley Cyrus and some others, there's some language that they're utilizing. But again, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that Post Malone doesn't proclaim Christ. I'm not sure Miley Cyrus proclaims Christ anymore. And so, but I do know that our president has said that he is religious and that he is a Christian. And so I'm wanting to judge him based upon that particular point, or at least offer up a standard by which I can align him and see. So I think that's a interesting point. So let's jump on over to Georgia. We've got Elaine there. Elaine, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Elaine, what is your point of view?
My point of view is maybe you can help me. Because I don't understand, and I'm confused. Kerby, I heard say a while back, you gather your information from different outlets, and then you come to your decision. Don't make a decision base your decision on just one information you hear from one. I look at CNN, I look at Fox News, I look at regular news, MSNBC. I listen at the negative radio stations, positive radio stations, and I'm still confused as a Christian or a follower of Christ as how can Christians follow. I'm confused. I don't understand it. It don't justify for me.
Yeah, so Elaine, you bring up some great points, and I think for Christians, I think there's some really good things about the Trump presidency that's been very helpful. I mean, you think about some of the efforts that he's done relative to religious liberty, I think is very helpful. I know that there's some talk relative to the omnibus bill that's going to be coming out, that the Johnson Amendment will be included in that. Johnson Amendment kind of giving more freedom to pastors to be able to speak on political matters. You think about Neil Gorsuch is kind of a bigger deal. That he's just been a pretty staunch pro-life, what we would consider a pro-life voice on that court, which I think is good. I think about some of the things that's happening overseas relative to ISIS and some of the individuals that were harming people, specifically Christians, that President Trump has seen just has led efforts to really cause their demise to a large degree. I think there are some really good things. But, Ms. Elaine, I think you bring up a really great point that there are some issues that are causing many Christians to wonder, how can we support such a president? And so there's a balance between, there's a ledger where we can go the positives and negatives, but I think what's very clear when we turn away from the ledger, but when we turn towards the biblical narrative, it's very clear that we need to pray for our president. And what we continue to see when we pray is that not only does it bring delight to God, it says in Proverbs 15:8, but it's also a beautiful opportunity to see God work as well. And we'll be back right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts on this Millennial Roundtable of Point of View today. I am joined by Jonathan Bodnar and also Kerby Anderson, and we have been talking about President Trump and evangelical support as well as just their criticism or probably lack thereof of our president. And we have been talking about kind of pivoted off of Michael Gerson's article relative to the relationship between evangelicals and President Trump that it really is available on our website. You can go to pointofview.net to find that article. It's just a really fascinating, thought-provoking 3,000-word article piece, as well as we have been taking your comments and calls. And so, unfortunately, the calls are kind of coming in today. In a shocking twist, people have a couple of opinions on this, and so there's really no room to call. So it's, when we take a call, know that that call will then open up. But nevertheless, you can jump on over to Facebook as well. And so facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You'll see me staring at you right now because we are so grateful that you've tuned in on the Facebook Live feed. But also know that you can leave a little comment or question underneath there, and we'll share it as well as we've been doing throughout the show today. And so we're going to go ahead and take another phone call. We've got Taylor over in Texas right now. Taylor, are you there?
I am here, yes.
Hey, Taylor, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself?
Good. You know, I can't complain, and it wouldn't do any good if I did. So what's your point of view, Taylor?
Well, my perspective is one that's informed, you know, of course, as a follower of Christ, but also as a student of political science, someone who's aware of the political atmosphere, political culture that we're in right now, political climate, whatever you will, and, you know, as an evangelical millennial as well. So with all that, I mean, my point of view would be that, you know, there's something we feel, well, y'all don't fail and I don't fail, but some people fail to understand is that there really are two spheres when it comes to politics and our faith, and that there's what we believe and then the political system constraints that shape how that belief comes into action, political action, and that, well, I'm sorry, I'm kind of, basically, yes, critique Trump, but do it in a spirit of intercession, and with motivated by concern.
Yeah.
And don't do it in a way that fans the flame that is the belligerent left, that just further discredits any effort that he does that is on our behalf. And I think there is, like everything in our walk with the Lord, there has to be a balance there, and between truth and love. And I'm with you, Nick, that we need to be critical when it calls for it. But there's just, given the political climate, there's such a danger and high stakes there that it does, the lunacy that is on the opposite side of the spectrum takes advantage of any and everything that they can.
So Taylor, you bring up a great point, because that's exactly kind of what I'm experiencing. It's almost as so there's you'll say there's a lunacy on the left. There's also this rattling insecurity on the right that if I voice any one dissent against our president, that somehow I've transitioned over, I'm a rhino, or I'm just somebody that's on the left, even by just being somewhat critical of the president. Right? It just is such a fascinating time that we're living in.
Yes, I agree, and I do see the dichotomy there, and the hypocrisy there, and I do believe that we should be able to criticize. We just have to do it in a very calculated, if not reserved way, or constructive way. Criticize but constructively so, and do it with the means of building up after you tear down, and just. I guess there's just has to be some tactfulness, I guess. I don't know how other way to put it. But, yes, definitely do not refrain from being critical when it's called for.
Yeah, so Kerby, I was thinking the other day, it was just so fascinating, because what I continued to hear is that I think sometimes when we hear some of these never-Trumpers speaking, it's sometimes we just tune them out, and we tune them out because all we hear is criticism from them, and we never hear when President Trump does something good.
That's the point, yeah. And I think that's a really good point, because as I mentioned just a minute ago, that one one of the things that might have happened is the situation in which we forget that there are different categories. There are some that are critical of Donald Trump, and they will always be critical of Donald Trump because they would be critical if Mike Pence were in office, or George W. Bush, or even Ronald Reagan. Now, it's easier to tune them out because you're never going to hear anything positive. But the others, I would say, especially since we're talking about the Michael Gersons, who I'd put in the second category, or the David Frenches, or even some of the evangelicals, to say, let's give credit where credit is due. I mean, yesterday we talked about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, we did talk about the fact this is a little more complex because you have Arab Christians that have a problem with that, but that's very good. When you are putting somebody of the caliber of Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, or when you had more individuals appointed and confirmed to the Federal Court of Appeals than in the history of the American presidency, breaking the record of John F. Kennedy and of Richard Nixon, and you don't hear anything positive, well, then at that point, I think you've lost your credibility to criticize the president, because we're looking for people that are honestly looking at the points and the pros and the cons, and when they're ignoring all of it, and, you know, all you get is that Donald Trump is a racist and the Antichrist, well, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, kind of, Jonathan reminds me, so millennials are very much attuned and very much interested in individuals that aren't hypocritical, but there's also that authenticity and consistency that millennials value as well. In a world that's continually been tumultuous, one might say, with the downfall of everything that happened at Enron, and with the hypocrisy in the government, and the breakdown of the family and the home, especially, is something we've grown up in. Consistency is something that we've greatly valued because we've seen it fall apart everywhere else. And so when we see individuals that aren't being consistent, it tends to cause us to cause not credit to be added to their account.
Yeah, I think Taylor said it perfectly. You know, I think there really is this black and white, you know, kind of way of looking at it. And when we see that as millennials, and when we see, you know, people coming, you know, out of the woodworks, religious leaders and whatnot, just being black or white, like just being completely critical, or just being, you know, not attributing the good things, and, you know, not even noticing the bad things. Yeah. It's very confusing, and it's very like, well, wait a minute, you know, should we be fully supportive, or should we even say something? Like,
yeah.
So.
Just such a fascinating time. What a time to be alive, y'all. What a time to be alive. You can call in at 800-351-1212, or you can go over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Let's continue to take some phone calls. And we've got Orban over also in Texas. Orban, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, gentlemen, for the discussion today. I think we need to make sure that we pray for our president. And I think sometimes we forget that God appoints a man for a specific reason at a specific time. And, you know, I used to listen to what David Wilkerson had to say about the presidents and stuff, and it made a lot of sense, because all of our hope is not in our president. I hope that our president is not withering on the vine. And I've heard people like James Dobson say some very positive things, and I hope he's hungry for the things of God, because God will feed him. But you should know them by their fruits, and I think what he's doing is wonderful for our country. But I hope that he's hungry for the things of God, and he'll keep growing. And the things that we hear, you know, new Christians do things that we don't like, but we don't judge them. You know, they're a work in progress. So I would like to encourage everyone to continue to pray for our president, and we hope that he's getting discipled. We'd like to hear that if he's getting discipled, not just withering on the vine. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much, Orban, for that phone call.
You know, we're going to be doing a little bit more this year on the National Day of Prayer, and of course, in the past, we've done quite a bit already. We've had Ann Graham Lotz, and certainly the Dobson family. We just mentioned them a minute ago, Shirley Dobson and others. But we're going to try to do that because, again, I hear a lot of people here saying pray for the president. I would also pray for the 9 members of the Supreme Court, pray for your 2 senators, your member of Congress. And one of the things I talk about in our new booklet here about praying for those individuals is that most people, only 5% of all the people that we talk about in that survey, could name the of 2 senators and their member of Congress. It's just amazing how we have certainly, obviously, not been praying for those individuals. If you cannot name your 2 senators, your representative, your state senator, your state representative, maybe some people don't even know who their president and vice president are, it's obvious you're not praying for them. So we're going to really emphasize the need to pray for our president this year.
Yeah, that's so rich. It's the idea that prayer is more than just a transition between song and sermon, but is really an opportunity for you to change the status quo by petitioning the one that is before all things and holds all things together by the word of his mouth. And so we're going to have to take one of those commercial breaks before we jump into the last segment. And so be sure to tune in. You can call in as well, 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. And for those of you on Facebook, thanks so much for watching. You can leave a comment or question underneath. Go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. A recent survey of Big Ten colleges reveals that universities are increasingly providing space for religious students on campus. According to the report, these new spaces on campus serve students from a variety of faith backgrounds. Some use the rooms for prayer and others for religious gatherings. But not everyone thinks the rooms should be used for just religious purposes, however. The Ohio State University student government passed a resolution urging campus leaders to reconsider the interfaith space as religious use only. Activists off campus questioned the University of Iowa, suggesting that setting aside rooms for use by religious students unconstitutionally entangled itself with religion. That, of course, is simply the political posturing of ideologues that dislike any religion appearing in public. The efforts by these universities are to be commended. Providing space for religious students to meet is an important means of recognizing the diverse religious background of its student body. At the same time, it should be unnecessary. Religious students should be able to use campus space on the same terms as secular students. To the extent certain religious backgrounds require specific space, the efforts by these Big Ten universities are to be commended. Yet it is important to remind our co-eds that, as in all of life, religious liberty means religious students are to be welcomed and tolerated in the university setting. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. This is Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable for this last segment by Jonathan Bodnar and Kerby Anderson, and we have had quite a show for you. If you've been watching on Facebook for the past 2 hours and 45 minutes, please leave a comment because we are going to need to send you something. We're going to have to send you something. We have been covering everything right now. We've talked about everything from the special election in Pennsylvania 18 Congressional District, where you had the Democrat Connor Lamb went ahead and upset the Republican because this was a Republican-held seat beforehand, and also President Trump carried this district by 20 points. We talked about the implications for that going into the 2018 election specifically. And then over the past 2 hours, or I guess hour 45 minutes, we've been talking about the evangelical relationship to President Trump. And it's just such an interesting relationship, really touching on, really the center of this conversation was about Michael Gerson's article, and Michael Gerson's article relative to evangelicals and to Christians in support of President Trump.
Well, you've talked about all the things we've covered, but there are a lot of things we haven't covered. And let me just point out that if you go to the website, pointofview.net, one of the article links that we have goes to the Nick Pitts Daily Briefing. And there, of course, you have the one about Lamb winning in that 18th district in Pennsylvania, but you have also the death of Stephen Hawking, which we'll talk about a little bit tomorrow in our first hour. Rex Tillerson, of course, actually being moved out as Secretary of the State, and Mike Pompeo, who is the CIA director, who, by the way, this is a little trivia point. Usually when you give a national security briefing to the president, you send a staffer. But President Trump liked Mike Pompeo so much that Mike Pompeo actually gives the daily briefing, which means of all the members of the Trump cabinet, Mike Pompeo has spent more time with the president than anyone else. And so now he's going to be in the State Department. So it'll be interesting to see how an individual who has been giving the information now can craft that message. And I think that's going to make a difference in China. Hopefully Russia. This is a president that has never said anything negative about Putin that I can think of.
Oh, my goodness.
And then, of course, you have United Airlines apologize. This is so sad, but
Damn,
it just, how did this happen?
Story.
The dog dies in an overhead compartment. Joy Behar actually apologizes. And then one of the things I love is you always have a couple of other stories that are kind of fun. This one on whether stress is contagious, and then some videos and some other things. And so if you are not subscribing to Nick Pitt's Daily Briefing, it is thebriefing.net, or just use the link that is right there. And anybody that gets up as early in the morning as you do to actually put this together is certainly worthy of intention that people should pay attention to.
You know, it's a lot of fun. This started a couple of years back. Just really, I was always interested in trying to get people's opinion on news articles. So I would always read the news, but then would shoot off all these articles. And then when I started working with the Denison Forum, I kind of put all that together in a working email that I would send. And now there's individuals that wanted to be a part of that email, and it's just kind of exploded now to really an opportunity to try to make sense of the news from a Christian perspective, one, and then two, help us to be able to make sense of this world. And so everything from informing you to the articles that of stories that'll be talked about, but then two, also those human experiences. Like we all experience stress. Well, new research indicates that stress can be contagious. Well, how am I to think about that from a biblical perspective? Well, you can find that in the Daily Briefing, and you can go to thebriefing.net, as well as a couple funny videos to remind you that the world is not falling apart.
Or a real sweet one with the older brother holding the little baby there that was sick. And so some of them you go, oh, and others you just laugh your head off. So again, some of the viral videos are also there. And all the links to this man knows more about music than all of us combined around the table. But nevertheless, all of it there on the Daily Briefing.
So great, so great. And so we have been talking about President Trump and about his relationship with evangelicals and evangelicals' relationship with him. And we have been taking some of your phone calls. And so we'll continue taking some of those phone calls until the very end. And so let's go ahead and Patricia in Texas. Patricia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Miss Patricia, what is your point of view?
My point of view is I noticed when Obama was the president that there were a lot of people having negative thoughts and just essentially just saying, bad things about him. But they're doing the same thing with Trump. And Trump, to me, he needs more prayers than just about anybody out there. But he needs support as well. And how you support him through sending letters about your concerns about what's happening, in your community, and you send it to your representatives and everything. But as soon as you see that the president needs to be removed, then you need to start taking action towards that. But in the meanwhile, support him with your prayers. Because he needs a lot. He really does. And the whole world now needs prayer. So in the long run, if we stick together and be united, then this country will maintain its greatness and maintain what God wants us to do as a country.
I completely agree with you, Patricia. It's just a continual need to be able to pray for our president, to support our president, and really interested in some of the comments that have come over the past 2 hours relative to what does support look like for our president. And so we're going to jump over, take one more phone call. We've got Liz in Texas right now. Liz, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Liz, what's your point of view?
Well, I was just calling to say that I totally agree with the millennials who feel frustrated right about now because, as I was telling the young man who took my call, I do believe that if those of us who are born-again believers, naming the name of Christ, if we are coming across like that, as long as the person in office is doing what we, quote, think that they should be doing, if it lines up with what we think, and then we turn our heads the other way when we know that there are certain things that are being said, and we act like character somehow doesn't matter as long as the person wins. And so I just think, I know I have been really pretty disgusted by some things, and yet I do know we have a responsibility to do what the Word says, and that's to pray for all of those who are in authority. And it's not just the office of the president. It's anybody all of those who are in authority. And so, again, I've been quite surprised and shocked, and I'm so glad that this conversation is taking place on Point of View today because for a long time it just seems like people have just kind of given our president a pass or whoever, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the president, but I just think that we cannot afford to do that. And first and foremost, our allegiance should be to God and what the Word says. It should be above party, anything. Nobody should say, because ultimately we're going to stand before God, not the president, not another elected official. We're going to have to give an account to God. And if we truly mean right and right by this president, our president, then we don't do him any good to always condone. Now, I'm not saying that the same thing goes the other way.
Yeah, I always am reminded, Liz, of looking back on history. And so I think back on history, I think about William McKinley and the character of McKinley relative to his wife specifically, of wanting to attune to every single one of her needs. I think about Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan and how close he was with her and how much he cared for her as well as cared for other individuals. And so I'm hoping that as I look to the past, it says in Romans 15 that I can see hope and encouragement, as well as I look to the past of America, I see hope and encouragement by, one, having individuals that are strong on policy, but also strong on character. Thanks so much.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.